religious freedom and marriage family breakdown. Our first speaker will be Most Reverend Emmanuel Badejo. He is the Catholic Bishop of the Diocese of Oyo, and he's also an international figure because he's the one in charge of communications among African bishops. So that's what makes his presentation really significant, because he's not only known locally but also internationally amongst the African bishops. So,
good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
And I'm really grateful that you are here at this session after the closing of the entire WCF event. And I'm grateful that Theresa ensured my presence here, because for two reasons. As an African, I'm interested in presenting the African worldview on stages like this, and also because she said I do represent the African bishops as communications chairman for their communications office. So I do have the advantage of being able to present what I believe is the view of the Catholic bishops of Africa, which is generally in the area of family, also the views of other churches as far as Africa is concerned. And what I would try to do is precisely on those four parameters, that the reality of life in Africa, when I hear about the movement, the family movement, I tend to say, what are you talking about? Because in Africa, everything is family. Life is family. But of course, I do understand the structuring of the movements, the work of the NGOs, the work of the organizations, the work of groups and individuals which the church cherishes very much. Then a little bit about the movement, the perspective that I have, and the perspective of the bishops, the Catholic bishops of Africa. Then what I consider the challenges and the future of the family. I'm going to try to be as concise as possible because the two ladies here are really the experts in these matters. I'm not married. I don't think I'm going to be anytime soon. So I concede that to them, but I think it's also important that the people sitting here know how much the Catholic bishops, the hierarchy of the church, cherishes the work that they are doing and the effort to protect the family and life in Africa. I want to say, first of all, that whatever we present here is just one perspective of Africa. It's a reality of 54 countries that it can very easily fit the United States, Japan, India, all together. 1 billion people, 3,000 ethnicities, 2,000 languages, and there are simply so many African perspectives. What we say today will be saying something, but not all about Africa. Just before the Synod on the Family in Rome, the bishops of Africa got together and for about a week deliberated on the challenges, precisely what we're trying to do here, the advantages of the African culture to the family. And they came out with the declaration, which includes what I have written here, that the family is a social and divine institution open to life, which expresses deep human relationship and intimate encounters constitutive of both the identity of the individual and the community. Constitutive of both the identity of the individual and the community. As I was sitting in the large hall and hearing so many speakers raising a voice against the attempt of government to define the individual and define the community, my mind kept going back to this, that it is the duty of the family to define the individual and to define the community, not that of the government. That is precisely the African worldview. And the clergy are strongly pro-life and pro-family, and we believe very strongly what Pope Francis said recently, that the lay people in Africa must graduate from being collaborators in the work of the church to becoming co-responsible people for the work of the church, for evangelization, and for the life of the world. So from the Nigerian and African day-to-day reality, these are the things I would say about the family. The family is life, and life is family. It is a vocation from above. Most people in Africa still desire the family. Children, youth, adults desire to be part of a family or to start a family. It's a sanctuary of love and life, the foundation of stable and coherent communities. There are communities and there are communities. And it is the sanctuary in time of loneliness and isolation, the source of hope and strength, identity for individuals and communities. I generally say, in African countries where there is no social security system, it is the family that actually is the social security system for everyone in Africa. So go north, go south, go west, you have the family to fall back to. You are lucky indeed. And in the life of the church as well, this has been the trend. From the life-changing familiarity consortium of Pope John Paul II in 1981, the church in Africa also has its own reflections, has had its reflections and identification with the survival of the family. And I think the first major event that cannot be forgotten is the first Synod of African Bishops in 1984 in Rome, which came out with the document Ecclesia in Africa, in which the African church defined herself as God's family, the family of God on mission. So indeed, the concept of family has become part of the identity of the African. No one should be surprised at the tenacity with which Africans hold on to the family, because it's either family or there's no life at all. Then there was as well the Second African Synod, which came out with the document Africa Munus, which also re-emphasized the missionary dimension of the family in turning the world around. Shortly before the synod that took place in Rome, I was lucky myself to participate in a consultation with the bishops of Europe, which took place in Mozambique on behalf of the African bishops, which again reflected on the challenges facing the family and the way to the future, and came up with a document, The Joy of the Family, in which all the things that the Africans cherish about the family have been re-emphasized. Of course, until the Synod on the Family, which ended just a couple of days ago. As for the family movement, I will say these things, that these have been animated for decades by courageous individuals like those who are sitting near me here, many of you sitting in this room, groups and associations, NGOs, diocesan mission and family, marriage and family commissions and committees. And the hierarchy of the church in Africa is grateful for those, because they are the ones who bring the attention of the church to what is necessary. And the dichotomy between the lay people and the hierarchy of the church, which is often noticed very clearly in the West, is not the case in Africa. In very many cases, the church works along with the lay people, with those who are married, who are, so to speak, the foot soldiers of the family movement and the family project. And therefore, of recent, national conferences of bishops have actually participated in organizing pro-life and pro-family congresses. In Nigeria, we have had 3 of that sort in the last 2 years alone. That shows that there's an attention to the dangers that's facing the family. And I am aware that it has happened as well in Cameroon, in Ghana, and in Senegal, and it's continuing. So there is a growing awareness of support for the family movement in Africa, and I'm sure you'll hear much more about that from the good lady sitting here with me. So it is a welcome, newer, growing phenomenon, the movement, which is defending the family against sundry threats, providing information and formation that the hierarchy of the church cannot easily get, or that other people who might be concerned or be too busy with other things of life cannot easily get. The family movement provides a platform for this kind of family advocacy, supporting the preservation of values and ideals of the family, and building bridges and support networks for the benefit of casualties and those who are marginalized. I have been thoroughly enriched by the number of diverse people and groups who have been at this Congress. The family movement in Africa does that as well for the peoples of Africa, and incarnating the gospel and church teachings. In my view, it is yet to be proven beyond reasonable doubt that the family is not the ideal environment for procreation and the formation of children. And this generally has been the view all over the world until the very curious movements have come around. I got to know that even the former First Lady of America, Hillary Clinton, at one time wrote a book of this title, It Takes a Village to Raise a Child, and actually referenced the African worldview as proof of the fact that, the family and the entire village raise children. But now things have changed in the West, but Africa does not intend to allow that to change. And I'm not saying this to say that the African family or the worldview of the African was perfect in the first place. There were always exceptions. As you can see in this graphic here, the scariest thing about me is that I'm the result of a happy child. There will always be the odd one out, the exception. But nonetheless, now as we stand, we realize as church that there are serious challenges that are decimating families in Africa. And some of these that I'm going to mention might depart a little bit from what we've been saying all through this Congress, as you can see. Old and new superstitions are still a serious problem in Africa. What do I mean by old superstitions? We understand them, the deities, but the new superstitions are the new movements, so to speak, religious movements who come and give very, very simplistic solutions to the problems of life, and give people all sorts of procedures to follow, and make all sorts of recommendations regarding people who are evil and these cause a lot of problems in families. Families that have been cohesive end up being enemies of one another because of the work of a visionary or a prophet or someone who says, the problem you have is because your sister doesn't like you, your brother doesn't. It has really broken up a lot of families, and it's a big concern to the church. Then the wars and unrest, as we've been seeing in Sudan, for example, and there are many other countries like that. Disease and AIDS, like in Equatorial Guinea, has been a concern for the breaking of families, and it renders the family themselves, the parents, helpless. And sometimes entire governments are helpless against this. We all remember, unfortunately, the genocide in Rwanda. So many families were thrown apart. The terrorism in Nigeria, in Kenya, election strikes, Burkina Faso, the Ivory Coast, and of course now the more recent phenomenon of migration to Europe. There are other causes of family breakdown that are more particular. I say win or lose. They have their advantages, but they do also have the disadvantages for breaking down the traditional African family. For example, the separation of the extended and nuclear families. When young families, because of education and employment, have to go far away from the extended family, the support they used to have to cope with tension and strife is no longer there. So they are isolated where they are, and very easily, quite a number of families break down because of that, because of urbanization and emigration. And of course, economic necessities, poverty, lack of work, disintegrates families. New religious movements that have come and have all sorts of exotic teachings and initiatives and creative theologies are responsible as well for breaking up families in Africa. Western education, very good, with all its advantages, does separate members too. When families don't have the right kind of counseling, and when members of the family look at other members of the family as unacceptable because of the different worldview, because of the kind of education they have. We experience this as pastors and as church, and we feel it is a problem that is beginning to grow, especially for members of families who come to study in Europe or in America. When they come back after a number of years, their worldview, their attitude to life is so different that it can be a serious cause of the breakdown of families. Religious fundamentalism, I did mention that, because now the phenomenon of the recruitment of youth into religious fundamentalist groups is growing in quite a number of countries in Africa. It is true that the governments are trying to cope with it, but we cannot deny the fact that it is breaking up families, taking young people away from, even in the villages, we're beginning to see little cells of fundamentalist groups drawing young people away from their families and turning them against the families to which they belong. New ideologies as well, which we are all very familiar with, responsible for this. Intermarriages that are not properly managed. Intermarriages between tribes cause quite a bit of disintegration of families. Sometimes at the point when they are attracted to one another, young people do not sufficiently do the background work to know what are the tendencies in one tribe or the other, whether they can actually cope with it. A few years down the line, it becomes a serious problem, and the marriage can become irredeemable. And sometimes it's not due to tribe, it's due to religion. Sometimes it's due to status. These happen in different areas all over Africa. When these intermarriages are not properly managed, not properly prepared or counseled, these are serious causes of breakdown of marriages, and of course, migration and dislocation for various reasons. Now, speaking about the freedom of religion, it is the opinion of the church that freedom of religion is, first of all, not a problem of the authorities of government. It is a problem of attitude, first of all. Something that needs to be, first of all, learned from the family. And I'm saying this because many countries in Africa have substantial population of people of different religions. If I take Nigeria, my country, for an example, it's about half and half Muslims and Christians in millions. And there are still traditional religion worshippers as well. Now, I lived in a family where we lived next door to Muslims. We participated in each other's feasts. We participated in each other's celebrations. So it was easy for us as children to grow up and to know that Muslims are brothers. And for those children to see us as brothers as well. Down the line, it's a little more difficult for other influences to come to teach me that the Muslim brother with whom I've grown up all my life and with whom we shared everything is now an enemy. However, if that is not learned within the family, it becomes more difficult to instill in the schools, which by now are beginning to break down as well, or further in life. So this must be learned within the family and also in the school environment. But if families are endangered, this is no longer possible. And in some places in Africa, the government is taking over schools for very many reasons, for the reasons of power, for the reasons of profit, and therefore they do not pay attention to this important dimension of an upbringing in interreligious sensibilities. And this can affect and does affect the freedom of religion, the exercise of religion of individuals. I just want to bring here quickly a case study from the recently concluded synod on the family. A bishop from Rwanda, emerging from the genocide of 1994, made a strong point about the serious problems for families in Rwanda at this moment. What did he mean? That the children and orphans who emerged from that genocide of 1994, who are now in millions, are now adults who are expected to themselves form families. But these are children and individuals who never had the experience of a family. They really don't know what it means to have a family, to belong to a family. Now, the bishop raised this problem that it is a serious concern for both government and the church and the society in Rwanda. This should be a concern for countries like Nigeria as well, or Chad, or Kenya, or Niger, where terrorists are beginning to produce again orphans and children who don't have parents. Now, this is a serious situation that, as I mentioned, quite a number of countries are going to have to face this in future. And the Bishop Antoine Kambanda of Rwanda said, an orphan is an orphan even if eventually adopted. Because most orphans still feel the need and lack of the family which will have given them the good upbringing to be good citizens and useful citizens in society and humanized citizens. We are expecting a lot from the family, but the family today is often not prepared. Notwithstanding all these challenges, the church still believes that the church herself is the family of God, suffering but caring, and that the future of the world and the church still passes through the family, and that the family must be sustained as the agent of humanization and evangelization, as an indispensable teacher of peace, a formator of consciences. Now, going into the future, what I believe we need, and the bishops of Africa have expressed that we need, is to find means through the organizations, through the institutions, and through the individuals who have the clout to keep government on its toes on education policies. That the education that the children, the young people get, must prepare them for the future. A future that will favor the family. A future that will favor inter-religious relations, positive inter-religious relations. And a future that will prepare them to be able to understand the mountains of information and influences that come through the media and through the new movements and the influences that are coming to Africa. That second point there is something that Africa doesn't seem to be very good at. Statistics and data. To know exactly how many young people have been affected by broken families, how many families are contemplating separation, How many families are dysfunctional, maybe staying together, but are not conducive for the bringing up of children? We need those statistics and data in order to be able to plan for the future. Then we also need to sustain the trust and alliance among traditional and religious leaders. We have found out that in areas where there is harmony among religious leaders, traditional, Islamic, and Christian, generally the society has the peace, the kind of peace that allows the family to thrive. It is possible for people to even intermarry and exist together in a way that can benefit society and benefit the individual. We need sustained education for dialogue and interreligious relations. And finally, in my view, the alliance with media networks and interests for the family project. To strengthen pro-family structures and programs, marriage and family commissions, little cells where they exist. Sometimes we ignore them because they're so small, but they are the ones who actually reach the grassroots. And to build resistance to the old and new superstitions which I spoke about, and to support the Catholic Church and quite a number of other churches has a wide network of those we call consecrated people, reverend sisters and brothers, who work in the villages and in the small communities. And they are all over the place. And they have programs to help families. If they get support, there is a lot that they can do to secure the future of the family and also religious.
Bishop, the commissions you mentioned on the previous slide, are they also associated with the government or with the church?
With the church, marriage and family commissions, they are with the church or the NGOs. There are NGOs also that have them as well. The main ideological challenge, and I'm concluding, are these: the prevailing and the popularized secular humanism, which is powerful and attractive because it is driven by technology and by the media. A culture of relativism has evolved, enveloped in greed and materialism. Pleasure itself has become a god. Values and life principles that held the families together have been sacrificed at the altar of money and wealth. The Synod on the Family said it is immoral, declared that it is immoral to compel nations or governments to alter their people's values to obtain help and support from anywhere. We need stronger voices to help to drive that point home even in a stronger manner. In summary, we must not only defend, protect, or preserve marriage, the family, and family values, we must proactively relaunch and affirm it as an indispensable good for society and for the fulfillment and happiness of the individual. It's no use sitting back until an attack comes, until a negative influence comes. It's important for us to actually present the family and the family values in Africa as a good that can be advertised, that can be adopted, and can be sold to others. To be merely defensive of the family is a strategy to attract attacks and demeaning activities against it. History is behind that kind of position, and we must find the best way to do it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Bishop Badejo, for that enlightening paper. I'd like to, my sister, African sister from Kenya, will deliver her presentation, and then I will also give my presentation. And I'll make sure we have ample time for questions and answers, because I'm sure you have questions you want to learn from the African perspective. So let me invite Mrs. Mbugua, an advocate practicing in the Republic of Kenya, and she's also the chairperson of Kenyan Christian Professionals Forum. She's a wife and a mother of 2.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. In keeping with the African tradition, I bring you greetings from the Republic of Kenya. We in Africa love bringing greetings, which of course you can't see, but they are greetings. You receive them. That's how that's how we have to get the affirmation, so that we take that message to our countries. Have you received them?
Yes.
Yes. Now, who am I? She's introduced me. I'm an advocate. I'm also a mother. But I want to confirm that it takes a village to raise a child, because I'm the 9th child in a family of 9. And I lost my mother when I was 8 years. And I was actually brought up by my brothers and sisters. And I remember there's a village elder who bought me a cardigan when I was in school. And when I passed exam, I remember a lady who brought me a tray of eggs. I mean, just to congratulate me, well done. I was going to be the second lawyer in my village, and that's a big thing from that village. So it takes a whole village to raise a child. And I am because we are. I think that is borrowed from the Zulu, umuntu. I am because we are. I am the chair of the Kenya Christian Professionals Forum. Who are we? Professions from all areas and cross denominations. What do? We are doing advocacy on the area of life, family, religious freedom, and governance. Just in brief, what have been our achievements? When we were making the Constitution in 2010, we managed to have life defined to be from conception. So in our Constitution, life begins at conception. So when the Constitution reads, every person has a right, that includes the child in the womb. That is one of our biggest achievements. Of course, I need to tell you someone sneaked in something else, that abortion is not permitted unless where the life and the health of the mother is in danger, or where permitted by any other written law. That is what we are fighting now. Another achievement that we have is that in our Constitution we define family to be between a man and a woman. So as of today, we are not going to have marriages between men and vice versa, because it's already there, unless our constitutional court actually declares another right, because we gave our constitutional court the power to declare other rights. So the risk is there, and that's why we have to be there. In the Marriage Act, following now the passing of the Constitution, we restated again that marriage is between a man and a woman. There was an effort to say that the minister can gazette another marriage, and we fought it, and we thank God that exited. We are fighting comprehensive sexuality education right now in Kenya. We thank God very much for Sharon Slater, because she came to Kenya in May this year, and she spoke to us. Our eyes were open. They were a bit open now, they opened wider. And between then and now, we've managed to see the minister who signed the commitment to roll out that program in Kenya. We've managed to see the minister. We are now in the committee that is working on the manual. And we are really hoping that we are going to influence that for Christ. We are also, this year we managed to co-host with the Republic of Kenya, the government of the Republic of Kenya, the National Family Day. We've never in the history of Kenya have we ever celebrated a National Day for the family. But this year we did, and that is when Sharon came, and our guest of honor was our First Lady. And we really thank God, because we got some access to government, and because of that, we are now in the committee formulating the National Family Policy of the Republic of Kenya. Now, since 2010, when the Constitution passed, we are yet to get to where abortion is allowed, because we've been fighting something called the Reproductive Health Bill. It comes into Parliament, it is withdrawn. They repackage it. It comes back. We shout. They tried on the side of policy, and we've also been fighting from that angle. So those are some of the few achievements that we've had, and we thank God, because God placed us there at the very right time. Because Bishop has covered a lot of what I would have mentioned, I'm going to make it very summarized so that we give Theresa a chance. Now, that is the present situation in Kenya. Marriage is between woman and man in a monogamous and polygamous setup. Of course, that's a new animal called polygamy. South Africa is an exception. That is where the gay agenda has moved ahead of all of us. Monogamy only legally recognized marriage in Tunisia and Rwanda. Those are two countries that are fighting polygamy, and we really thank God for President Kagame. He's been very instrumental. 35 countries have anti-homosexual laws with varying degree of punishment. You saw what happened in Uganda, when they tried to bring the they tried to bring the legislation penalizing homosexual behavior, and you know what happened. But 35 countries have them. In Kenya, actually, sodomy is a crime under the penal code. The bad news is that there is a man who has gone to our court. It's called Ian Castleman from Australia. It's not even a Kenyan. Has gone to our court and said that law is unconstitutional because our constitution removed discrimination on any ground. So we know it's a big battle. We've joined that suit as interested parties, we the Kenya Christian Professionals Forum, and many other suits that are pending. We have a big problem between culture and faith, and Bishop, I think you've mentioned about that, where people are trying to leave the faith, but they are still deep-rooted in the culture, negative culture. There is positive culture. There are many matrimonial property wrangles, and we're in the crossroad. I will speak more on this because I'm a lawyer. We are not sure we are in common property. When you marry, are you in common property or can you have separate property? So we have a lot of fights in our courts on after divorce, on what do I take, what do I leave behind. The succession protected tassels are a big deal, and I think it's because of poverty. If you only have land as the only wealth, then we have to fight over it. We are trying to come up with legislation which could help us fight, and I guess it's so in many African countries. Burial disputes, this is amazing. Some people still fight. I don't know whether they are there in Nigeria, Bishop. Yes, and you ask yourself, why would you fight over where to bury the person? It's because I think in some communities they see like there is property in the body. If you bury on this land, then I have a right to claim that land. Or dowry. Assuming I've been staying with a man and he has never paid dowry and I die. So my people will come and say, no, you should not bury her because you have not paid dowry. So there are interesting things that happen in Africa also. And then the paradox of modern polygamy. And this is amazing because the people who are fighting for polygamy in Africa are the feminists. It is a big contradiction because they should be fighting for equality between a man and a woman. But it is also, it is an economic issue. If I'm wife number 3, then I want to be recognized. Or if I'm mistress number 3, why should I be mistress? Why can't you just register me as wife so that in case of death or divorce, I fight for property? That's a thinking. Dowry is still an issue. And I think looking at Africa, most countries have made it non-mandatory in forming marriage. So, but it is there, especially for the traditional marriages. Child marriages are still an issue of concern, and I know quite a number of legislation across Africa has outlawed now child marriages. The problem is that it happens in villages, in the dark corners, culture again being a challenge, and of course the Islamic religion being a supporter of that. Increase of formal divorces, that's increase of single parents. Those things we've been hearing the whole week have come to Kenya. They've come to other countries in Africa. So we can see increase of formal divorces. And then single by choice, this is a new thing. I don't want burdens, but I want a child. In fact, I'm a family lawyer, and I've had clients who say, I've been approached just for the child. I mean, she doesn't want anything from me, she just needs a sperm, and that is it. So single by choice, and it looks like it's progressive, in quotes. Separation due to migration, I think Bishop, you've already talked about that. We've all been seeing the great migration across the Sahara in search of greener pastures and other things. Now, there's something called the Maputo Protocol 2003. And I bring this so that you can see the vision of our leaders of where we should be. This is an AU protocol, African Union protocol, on the right of women. It came into force in 2005 after ratification by 15 countries. Article 6 is on marriage, and its position is that marriage is between man and woman. That is a protocol of the African Union. So it's a good document to use while you're fighting the gay agenda in our countries. It embraces the principle of equality. It's fighting forced marriages. The target is to eliminate child marriages. very interesting, monogamy is a preferred form of marriage under the Maputo Protocol. So this is a document that came up when feminists and other women of goodwill fought very hard. And we said we should be promoting monogamy. So it's very disappointing to see countries like in Kenya actually saying now polygamy can actually be, is legislated, and now you can have 2-3 marriage certificates. It actually goes against the Maputo Protocol. All marriages should be registered. You'll be surprised, in Africa many marriages are not registered because there is half customary, half customary, come we stay. And when it comes to death or fight, it's not clear, am I married or not? I work for quite a number of European embassies, and this is one area I'm consulted most. Are these people married? Because they come with a certificate saying, I started staying with. So they ask, is they married by affidavit? There's a lot of confusion. Now, many countries are moving to register home marriages even if they are the polygamous ones. For a good reason, let's know who is married and married to who. Now you can retain your maiden name. I think we're becoming more independent. Women can choose their nationality in the context of marriage. They shared parental responsibility. This is a good thing. It comes so much into play when it comes to divorce. Now it is easier to say the duties of a man and the duties of the woman in supporting the kids going forward. The right for women to acquire property, that may look like it's obvious, but when you're coming from a traditional setup where most of the property was land which was ancestral, then hardly did women have titles. Because where will it come from? Because you are married into that family. But now, you've said women can acquire property. It is debatable. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Should we be promoting common property or separate property? Big debate. The children's interests are paramount. This is also drawn from the African Charter on the Rights of Children and also international conventions. Equitability sharing in matrimonial property. That is where Maputo people wanted to take us. You realize it's not equal sharing of matrimonial property, it's equitable sharing. Threats facing the family, the gay agenda, the top-bottom push, and the donor carrot. Now, this we all know, that is what we've been talking about here. This in Kenya is very, very pronounced, as I'm going to show you in the slides below. The national conflict, which disrupts family life, many widows and orphans, especially in the conflict-torn countries. HIV pandemic, Bishop spoke about that. Reduced parental authority. We can see a push to reduce the authority of parents in children's life. So especially in the reproductive health bill, which I have said has never gone through our parliament, but it is there, where you say children can get child-friendly, adolescent-friendly reproductive health services without the involvement of parents. You are really attacking parental responsibility. Where was I? I'm trying to find myself. Yes, permissiveness and sexual rights that we've heard about the whole week. Now, increase of dysfunction and broken families, and this is where now Bishop was saying we need to get data. We're trying to do so in Kenya. I tried to look around and I could see the ones of South Africa. We don't have proper data. You can only tell by the number of cases that are filed in court. What I can tell you, the trend is upward. There is increase. The push for surrogacy and IVF, this is part of the reproductive health rights package. It's embraced in this reproductive health bill, which has not passed in our law. But IVF bill worked on its own and it nearly passed until we asked some bioethical questions, which has made Parliament share of it. I'd mentioned that property and succession dispute, extended family interference, polygyny, and polygamy. Now, I need to go to the Kenyan issue. I want us to focus on Kenya, where the gay agenda is concerned. We commissioned Ipsos Innovate to do a survey last year. And what we saw that 87% of Kenyans do not support abortion on demand. Any Yes, 97% straight answer, whichever way you ask the question. And then majority oppose abortion on demand on the ground of morality. So the faith is still very strong in Africa. They will simply say it's against my faith. Homosexuality, 93% of those polled did not know any person who is homosexual. Which means they are either under or it is not prevalent. But majority of Kenya didn't insert that. The figure is close to 90 of people who do not accept the practice. Tolerance of homosexual behavior is mainly in urban areas. Like in Kenya, it was in Mombasa and Nairobi, those who know the country. 64% believe it is an acquired behavior. It's not you're not born this way, you acquired it. The Kenyan Penal Code criminalizes homosexuality. It is classified as a natural offense, an indecent act. I can tell you where we are. This is the Kenyan executive position. Our president stated it this year when President Okafor visited our country. What he said, it is difficult for us to impose on people that which they themselves do not accept. Our culture and our society do not accept. Kenya values family. Gay rights issue is a non-issue. That is the position of our president. Our deputy president is more vocal on this issue. So as far as the executive is concerned, we don't see any blessing for the agenda. But let's keep going. This is the position of the Kenyan parliament. No act of parliament, no draft on the gay agenda has ever been placed in parliament for obvious reasons. If the majority of Kenyans don't support the gay practice, then that document will not have a chance in parliament because parliamentarians are voted by the citizens. So it's unlikely that a bill would pass in our parliament. So we even have a anti-gay caucus. We've been trying to ask them to rename it, but right now they call it anti-gay parliamentary caucus. Very vocal. They actually issued statements on the eve of President Obama's visit, and they said, we don't want you to speak about it when you come to Kenya. They are more vocal than the executive. But let's see the third arm of government. And where it derives its power, our concern really is in the judiciary. And I think this is the biggest threat in Africa. 2010, we passed that constitution. We embraced general principles of international law. If any one of you knows what is that, you can tell us. And then we say general rules of international law and treaties and conventions ratified by Kenya become part of the Kenyan law under this constitution. And then we gave our judiciary powers to declare other rights. In fact, we say this Bill of Rights does not include all the rights, which means there are some rights out there which can come on board. And who did we give the power to? The constitutional court to declare rights. These are the principles that are to guide our judiciary in interpreting the law on the Bill of Rights. They are the values that underlie an open and democratic society based on human dignity, equality, and freedom. That is what the judges should consider. Now, like I've said, we also give the power to the courts to develop the law. We didn't do enough. We said you can develop the law. And then adapt the interpretation that favors the enforcement of the rights. Then we eliminated discrimination on all grounds, and I mean all grounds. It says the state or any person shall not discriminate another on any ground, including, so we stated the ones which Kenyans thought were nice, race, sex, whatever. We didn't put sexual orientation, but we did not need to put sexual orientation because all grounds mean all grounds. Mm-hmm. Then they also said you should not discriminate on the grounds above or those contemplated under this provision. Mm-hmm. Now, we didn't know what the draftman, what did the draftman contemplate? We now know. And then our constitution says we should seek protection of minorities. Of course. Then the Kenya National Human Rights and Equality Commission was empowered to monitor and enforce. And they've been very, very active. The other day they did a study and they connected homosexuality and HIV, and they said many homosexuals are dying because they cannot get medical care from the hospitals. We need to decriminalize sodomy so they can go to hospitals, and the whole stretch. We have a very strong human rights, and it's us who have put it there. Transgender, now, these are cases that have come in our court between 2010 and now. We have a transgender case. One Andrew decided he will be Audrey. He didn't even go to the surgery in a room. He just changed his clothes and wore a wig, good lipstick. And Anne is here. Anne is from Kenya. Sorry, I should have introduced Anne. Anne has been our administrator. She's the one who moves this institution. She's an excellent lady. Sorry, Anne. Yes. Now, Audrey went to court and said, please sued the Kenya National Examination Council and said, since my certificates read Andrew, and I need to look for a job, I want them to read Audrey. The Examination Council said, no, we can't. So he took, actually, it is a he because no surgery even has been done. He took the council to court, the Constitutional Court, and the court surprisingly interpreted the law in his favor. We were actually a party to this suit. We had joined as a party. This suit is pending now in our Court of Appeal, and we are praying, because more conservative judges are in the Court of Appeal, that it may go a different way. But woe unto us, even if we win, and it goes to the Supreme Court, because the Constitution brought a Supreme Court, that is where we think our biggest risk is. Because we brought people with very dangerous judicial philosophy. They came from the civil society world. Some of them were working with Ford Foundation. So, bisexual case. A girl, bisexual. Yeah. This child came to court and said, the birth certificate cannot read she or he, you know that place, female, male. And wanted something again. This is the mildest case. And again, the court, the way they interpreted the situation of this child was more, let us accommodate. But the threat was declaration of the third gender, where we have another one of other. But the court declined to give that. That's where we are on that. Sodomy case is that one of the Australian man. He actually came to Kenya as a missionary. Then he abused some boys. Then he was charged with sodomy. Then he raised a constitutional reference and said, no, this law is unconstitutional because Article 27 of the Constitution says there is no discrimination on any ground. So why should I be discriminated because of my orientation? This suit is pending in the High Court, and we are also a party to this suit. Then we have a right of assembly, an association of gay rights, whatever. What they wanted is registration. Some people came together and said, we are a gay lobby group, we are fighting for the rights of the gay people, they are harassed, they're denied jobs, we are just coming to fight for their rights. They went to the NGO board, and the NGO board said, sorry, we cannot register you. How much time? It's over. Yes, we cannot register you because we don't believe in this agenda. They went to the Constitutional Court. And this is the suit that tells us where Kenya is likely to go. And again, KCPF was a party to that suit. Now, these are the orders they wanted. A judicial interpretation that words every person in Article 36 of the Constitution includes all persons living within the Republic of Kenya despite their sexual orientation. That article states every person has a right to freedom of association, which includes the right to form, join, participate in the activities of an association of any kind. Okay? I can see it becomes sad. Then it says a declaration that the respondents have contravened the provisions of Article 36 of the Constitution in failing to accord fair and just and fair treatment to gay and lesbian persons living in Kenya seeking registration of an association of their choice. What did the judges say? Okay, these are more orders. Every person includes someone of that orientation. Now, on religious belief, this is a summary, they said, we should not turn these beliefs, even in moderate or gentle versions, into dogma imposed on the whole society. This is in response to submissions, that this is against our faith, it's against our culture. That is what they said. And then they said, the court held that it cannot also be proper for the board to limit the right of freedom of association on the basis of popular opinion. The court relied on South African case. And you see, that's why South Africa is causing us problems. Public opinion may have some relevance to the inquiry, but in itself, it is no substitute for the duty vested in the courts to interpret the Constitution and uphold its provisions without fear or the favor. The courts have power to protect the rights of minorities and others who cannot protect their rights adequately through democratic process. Those who are entitled to claim this protection include the social outcast and marginalized people in our society. That tells us where Kenya is going. Again, this case we have now appealed. We are in the Court of Appeal. Now, so what is really influencing Kenya is the constitution, the activism, then top to bottom, this you will feel it more on things like the comprehensive sexuality education, the media, and all those things which have been put there. I have to finish. What do we do? The church has to rise up, and that is our work in KCPF, making the church to wake up, telling it, wake up, there are all these challenges. We're doing a lot of civic education. That's where we spend a lot of our time. And then we have to go back to the family networks because culture still remains very strong in our country. So that is a wealth, a place we can tap some resources. Politicians have been very helpful, but as you can see, the courts have been very progressive in court. I think I have to end there. Yes, I think that was the last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that and that. We still have time. It's 4 o'clock, and this it's 4 o'clock, and this session is meant to end at 4:45. So we have time for my comments and questions and answers before we go over for the next session. Now, looking at the topic, family breakdown and religious freedom and the African perspective, I argued, do we really have an African perspective on the family and on religion? Because family and religion are actually universal concepts. A family is understood anywhere in this world as comprising a mother, a father, and children. And religion, on the other hand, is understood as a relationship between a man and the supreme being. Even Africa understood that before the Christian missionaries came. And that was why it was easy for African countries to resonate with what the missionaries were saying. Again, perhaps we can say there is a perspective, and perhaps that perspective is rendered by the historical context. So for instance, when an African says family, you want to find out, is it same mother, same father? Because I could say she's my sister, but she's from Kenya, or we're sisters because we're Africans. And of course in Africa, we have the extended family system like Bishop Badejo has explained to you, which includes the grandparents, and they're a wealth of knowledge. In Africa, we call our grandparents the library, because they're the ones that teach you the know-how. And aside from that, we also have the aunties, the uncles, and what have you. So you would hardly find things like foster homes or old people's homes or orphanages. It's rare in Africa because when you have if something happens, if a family experiences a trauma, someone dies, then you start to think, okay, where do we put this person home? Where do we put that person home? Now, Yes, we do have breakdown, we do have denial of freedom, and these are things that Africans are treating with a lot of seriousness. And I tell you what, I tell you a story. You see, a Liberian man flew into Lagos and collapsed at the airport, and he was rushed into hospital. And they wanted a hospital that had American expertise because they said, well, he's half American, an American doctor, and so he was flown into a hospital, St. Nicholas Hospital on Lagos Island from the airport. And the doctor who attended to him suspected that this Liberian man had an infectious disease and requested that he be quarantined and that samples of his blood be sent off for testing. And he was sent to Senegal because the country didn't have the expertise. The lady who discovered that he had something, that was something unusual about him because of the symptoms she noticed, said, this is not known enough in Nigeria, so we'll fly him out. Anyway, the end of it all was that it was discovered he had Ebola, and the whole country felt threatened. A country of 180 million. How do you cope? And in Lagos alone, 18 million citizens. So St. Nicholas did the needful. The lady condoned him off completely against his wishes. And unfortunately, the doctor lost her life. Like the typical Christian missionaries, she died because she contracted the infection, but she saved the nation, and we call her a hero. A number of nurses and doctors within that hospital also contracted the same infection. But the interesting thing was that we had American doctors who flew into the country. Missionaries came into the country. And where Nigerian citizens were too scared to associate with the Nigerians that had the problem because they didn't understand it, they didn't know how to handle it, the Americans were the ones touching the thing because they knew. They had an understanding of this thing. They were the ones, even at the risk of their own lives. Like the typical attitude of the Christian missionaries, at the risk of their own lives, they did everything possible to help people to understand the worship of the true God, which does not permit killing of twins, which does not permit human sacrifice, which does not permit pedophile, which does not permit all the sexual sins, including homosexuality and what have you. So you see why we take religion really seriously in Africa, and why we take anything that threatens family and religion as we, in fact, it's like something drastic needs to be done. And that's why Nigerian government, you know, Nigeria is a very rich country, rich in oil, and oil is being discovered by the day. Even in my grandfather's backyard, oil was discovered. We're so rich. You know, the blessing is immense, you know. We're rich in resources, you know. But the problem is 70% of the population are still living under poverty. And why is that? It's a problem of governance. But by and large, we're getting there. The government is becoming a lot more accountable. But then, the point is that even though there is a lot of corruption in the country, which is not news to you, because at least in Switzerland, our money is what is servicing the economy. The money stolen by our governors and our presidents, because billions were carted away by previous administrations and put in foreign banks. Those monies haven't been returned, you know. So, and I'll tell you what, if the billions stolen by previous governments in a country like mine, Nigeria, were to be distributed amongst the people in the population, I at least would get 1 billion naira. I'll be 1 billion naira rich, just to show you the amount of theft. But despite that, despite the corruption in the country, all right, the government will not yield when it comes to anything that is a direct attack on the family. Anything that will result in the disintegration of the family or denial of religious freedom. So you can see why we take drastic measures in Africa when it comes to, because family is all we've got. And one good symbolism, or one good metaphor I would use to describe the threat we're facing, which is threatening our families. Because when you say, again, when I looked at family breakdown, you know, I said to myself, this is an oxymoron. Because how can you put two contradictory terms together, family and breakdown? Families do not break down. Especially in Africa, where you have a family support system. You have to, if there are quarrels between a husband and a wife, even if a wife goes to the police and says, my husband beats me up, the police will say, go back home and settle with your husband, madam. We have a whole structure to support the family. And unity in the family is hinged on biblical principles that men love your wives and wives love your husbands. Wives, be submissive to your husband. Like many people would describe it, one is the president, the other is the prime minister. So it's not a subservient relationship, as we're often believed at the UN. It's a complementary relationship. It's not a matter of seeking for statistical equality, 50-50. Only statistics, that's what they're looking for, statistical equality. And statistical equality does not even take into consideration families that may have chosen to be stay-home mothers, to stay at home and take care of their children, because they realize that those children have a future. So, in Africa, yes, we feel threatened. And this is, the Trojan horse. I would always use the symbolism of the Trojan horse. Because Homer's Odyssey and Aeneid's Elegy will talk about the Trojan horse. The Trojan horse was a wooden horse that had some soldiers hidden inside. And it was presented, it was a destructive phenomenon that was presented to the people of Greece as something that was benign, something that was beneficial. And the Trojan horse was so big, it was such a big thing, that the people of Greece tore down part of their walls of the city, to allow the horse in, tearing down. And then even when the horse entered the city of Greece, there was partying, celebration, victory was a trophy. Sounds much like the gay pride, and the victory. We're celebrating, jumping, And at night, what happened? When the people of Greece were all asleep, had fallen asleep, all the soldiers came. The soldiers came in from hiding and killed everyone and took the women of Troy. The women of Troy. When the Troys had fallen asleep, they took all the women into slavery. Well, some of the women who survived the assault, they took them as slaves, took their children as slaves. And so, the sexual revolution is the Trojan horse threatening families, threatening religion. And that's why at the UN we are so protective of family, culture, and religion. We're not ashamed. Some people want to privatize religion so much so that you're not even allowed to mention religion. Or when you mention religion, they think you are one odd being. Or, all those primitive Africans, here they come again. It's the only thing that matters to us. Strip us of family, strip us of religion, strip us of culture, and you annihilate us. That's the end of the African continent. And that's why, in spite of the corruption, the government is so protective and harsh when it comes to this thing. And of course, when you think about the situation in Uganda, it even becomes a lot more clearer what is going on. Because obviously in Uganda, you had a pagan. In 1849, Christian missionaries went to Uganda and converted the king. But after that king died, another king was elected. And he was a perverse king. He was pedophilia. He was making sexual advances at the pages in his court. And because they had been converted to Christianity, they refused to give in to him. And what did he do? They were burned at the stake. They were killed. Charles Luanga and the 40 martyrs of Uganda, they were burnt at the stake. Because their Christian belief stopped them from yielding to the sexual advances of a perverse king. So you can understand, with that, given that historical background, why Uganda decided to actually say death sentence. Oh no, sorry, not even death sentence. They said life imprisonment for anyone who advertises homosexuality, celebrates homosexuality or same-sex marriage. You can understand why they took that grave position, although eventually they have to yield. And right now, sodomy, which is what is called in their constitution, is still criminalized. So, family breakdown, yes, we do have family breakdown in Africa, okay? Because we have war in Africa. And war is what St. Pope Francis called a defeat of humanity. A defeat of humanity, you know, and yes, war displaces people, and that's why you have, obviously you can understand that South Africa is one continent that you have many fatherless children, many single mothers and many fatherless children, because of their history of apartheid and the various war and what have you in that continent. But also in Sudan as well, all the parts of Africa where you've had war, this is the result you get. This is the result you get. Even when I visited Rwanda, I know we have the ambassador of Rwanda in our midst, but when I visited Rwanda, many of the people were very young. They were young because of the genocide. The genocide had taken, in fact, I guess you have many women in government because the genocide had taken most of the men. So war displaces family. That's one thing that war does. Migration is another thing that also displaces families. You know, people, and when I'm talking about migration, I mean economic migrants. You know, because sometimes people migrate and they are undocumented migrants, and when they are undocumented, obviously they cannot go back. They're stuck in the system, and then their families cannot join them as a result of that. And you can imagine families are displaced for so many years because they don't want to go back because they know the implications, you know, what have you. And then their families cannot join them. So that is one of the causes of family breakdown as well. And well, you could say poverty and work, that also could be another reason, because when their expectations are high and then you don't bring, what do you call it? You don't bring work home. There's a popular phrase that doesn't come to mind now. But, obviously when there's a lot of poverty, that in itself can affect families. And that's why governments, when you have responsible government, they also try to support large families. They also try to support large families. And that's, I think that that's one admirable thing about the UK system. Despite all the faults that we have, they still have a very good welfare system when it comes to large families, because the large families are really supported by the government. But you could also say maybe that's part of the problem. When you have a nanny state, maybe that's part of the problem, where the government now dictates, or makes abortion legal and what have you, because they want to stop the number of children. But I think that it's admirable how much the government supports large families in that system, and that's something we don't have in Africa. And obviously, public morality, the sexual revolution is something that really, really affects families in Africa. And we know that a lot of that comes through the media, it's coming through the media. It's almost like an infiltration, So through the media, you find things that are a bit curious, You find even movies celebrating sexual rights, which would not be tolerated by the country, because obviously it's criminalized by the country. But you find movies celebrating, you find it infiltrating itself through books, especially because there is a design on Africa to get Africa to be more liberal. So you find authors who are celebrated abroad, but then by the time you place their writings under scrutiny, you will discover that they're actually trying to tear down religion. For instance, this lady that is often celebrated, Chimamanda Adichie, writes very well, good diction and what have you. But by the time you really scrutinize her writing, you'd see that what she's trying to do is to undermine religion, undermine family, because she's very feminist and very liberal. But of course, she's been given a prize in the United Nations. She's been, her books have been quoted one of the best. And then Nigerian government is celebrating the fact that one of their own has been given a prize, and then her books are recommended in literature in schools, not knowing that some of those concepts are actually anti-family. So these are some of the problems we're having. Movies, videos, music, the music industry, because and anything West is really attractive. I mean, if you were to ask any Nigerian, sing me the latest from Beyonce, or I don't know, what have you, they would sing everything, and because there is this heroine worshipping and hero worshipping going on, everything West is sucked in by the population, and then it has its problems too, especially when some of these holy, not Beyonce, because she's married to, I don't know, Jay-Z, at least they've been married for years, no problem, but sometimes, these Hollywood movies, when they present marriage as something that is not permanent, it creates confusing, contradictory ideas in the minds of young people. They really begin to view marriage as not permanent, especially with the spate of divorce and what have you. And so yes, the curriculum, and yes, cohabitation is another thing threatening, and it's really a problem in our society, because we do have the Christian marriage and we have the traditional marriage, and sometimes you're told, okay, you have to be, when you do the traditional, then you are married, and many people don't give in to, we're not married, because obviously traditional does not mean that you are really, really married, because marriage is something sacramental in the opinion of many Africans, I mean the Christian population in Africa, because we also have the Muslims, okay? So that again can be problematic, and of course the typical case of the Blade Runner who killed his cohabitating partner. Many people in sub-Saharan Africa were wondering why a lot of focus was on the fact that, well, yes, it's bad enough that he killed her, it's bad enough that he killed her, but no one seems to be talking about the fact that they were actually cohabitating. And cohabitation is usually the source of such kind of violence, because one does not feel any commitment to the other, and they don't even have the grace of the sacrament to protect them. So anyway, so this is part of the problem. And of course, I'd say that some of the reasons why you have family breakdown in Africa is also the lack of moderation, because sometimes parents can be a bit too extreme, and it can make children resentful, or so that as well could be part of the problem when they do not know how to balance firmness with fairness. Okay, so now let me move on from family breakdown, because most of the causes and discussions centering around family breakdown have already been discussed by Bishop Badejo and sorry, forgive me if I didn't pronounce his name very well. So now when it comes to religious freedom, again, that cannot be contextualized from the history and the culture of the people. And I've told you what happened in Uganda. The pages in the court in Uganda were not free to practice their religion, and as a result, they were murdered, they were killed. And I know that a lot of talk has been going on about some of the remarks I made in Australia, because I know that in Australia I did say something like there's a kind of conspiracy between, there seems to be, I put a hypothetical situation before the audience. I said, could there be a kind of conspiracy between what is happening in Africa and what is happening in the Western countries, whereby Christians are being persecuted for their faith? Because in Africa we have a different dimension of persecution, with the Boko Haram throwing a bomb in a church on Christmas Day and actually targeting Christians. But then they are also targeting Muslims, they are targeting people of faith, And then I said, and then of course, in Europe, in the UK, we see Christians being targeted. They are actually being terrorized into silence. They are afraid to speak up for what they believe. If you were to say marriage is a union between a man and a woman, you are a bigot, you are a hater, so people are afraid because there are reputational costs. It can cost you your job. It may not cost you your life like it does in Africa, but it could cost you your means of livelihood. It could cost you your quality of life. There are reputational costs there, so it's like, what is going on here? Why are people of faith being persecuted? Why are they being criminalized? And I said, could there be a kind of conspiracy between the two? And then, of course, the interpretation is that this African said Boko Haram, gay people are Boko Haram, or I don't know, whatever they have to say. But I'm not interested. I'm not ready to even defend myself. People are free to their opinion. But what I do know is that one can view it in terms of the relationship. You can look at it as a kind of causal or correlational relationship between what is happening in Africa and what is happening here. Like some people will tell you, it's like the devil has been unleashed on the streets, because they cannot understand. It's pagan, it's devilish, it's fetish, and what have you. But in any case, Conspiracy could also be any concurrence in action, anything concurrence in action, anything bringing about some evil consequences, which is like discrimination, because obviously you are asked to be tolerant and yet your views, they are intolerant towards your views. But anyway, this is outside the discussion, so I'd focus on the religious freedom. And again, religious freedom in Africa can also prevail in marriages whereby you have cases of mixed marriages, and I think Bishop did mention that, but in Africa it's a patriarchal society, you could say, and we don't have anything, we're not opposed to that. Do you understand? Because we understand that male and female differ. We're different. We have different cognitive strengths. We're anatomically different. We're psychologically different. This is biology, this is medical science. We're different. And so women would not go to fight in the war or even take front places in a battle because we're different. So why I'm saying this is because obviously in marriage at times, in Africa for instance, women are submissive to their husbands. But it could also have there are some extremes regarding that tradition, in the sense that if, for instance, you marry a man who is a Muslim, you may automatically become a Muslim. Or you marry somebody who is Anglican, you may automatically become Anglican and you stop practicing your Catholic faith. And obviously there are differences between the two, So that in itself could be problematic, you understand? So this is where religious freedom is lacking. But there are some cases where that religious freedom is actually practiced. And again, it has to do with mutual understanding between spouses. And again, I think that religious freedom, part of the problem we have, and many people will tell you, is historical. It has to do with the colonial masters who just partitioned Africa and made some people like, the leaders, for instance, in Nigeria, a typical example, where the Northerners, they felt that the Southerners were too aggressive, I don't know if the same applies to Southerners in different parts of the world, but Southerners were considered too aggressive, and so they felt the Northerners should be made, the leaders, so the Northerners were like in indirect rule, so somehow Northern hegemony, you had it, and obviously you can see the consequences of that, because obviously the Northerners want to remain in power, and once they get into power, all the strategic things in the country, oil, what have you, the Northerners are there at the top of it, So how does that affect religious freedom? Well, perhaps if Nigeria was not partitioned the way it was, then it would be clear, what religious adherents, the different people resident in the different parts here. But in any case, we're still happy to be together as a country, as long as we're allowed to. And I think that generally, like the Bishop Badejo has said, when we were children, you could have your neighbor who is a Muslim, and on the day they have the feast day of the Muslim, she will bring you meat. She'll bring meat over to you. And even at the United Nations, we're becoming friends with the Muslim countries, since the Western countries do not want to respect family or religion or culture. So they are gradually pushing us to take up the Arab countries as our allies, because obviously they do not seem to agree with those things that really matter to us. So these are some of the things I felt I would talk about. So much more to discuss, but I'd like to leave some time for questions. So 3 people have